This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
West African leaders discuss Mali's political fate amid calls for an interim civilian-led government. Africa's expectations ahead of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And a group of visually impaired musicians get ready for concerts in Egypt after months of COVID-19 disruptions. Hello and a warm welcome to Africa Live on CGTN. I'm Lindy Mtongana in Nairobi. And with me is Uche Okoronkwo with a preview of your business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. U.S. oil and chemical companies push Kenya to drop restrictions on plastics as the two nations negotiate a trade deal. And annual inflation in Sudan rises to 166% in August. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it is back to you, Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. We start the hour in West Africa, where more pressure is being put on Mali's military coup leaders to hand over power to a civilian transitional government. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, who is the acting chair of the regional bloc ECOWAS, says this must happen immediately after the lapse of a deadline set by regional leaders. His remarks came ahead of a critical meeting of ECOWAS leaders in Accra today, which was also attended by the head of Mali's military junta, Colonel Assimi Goïta. West African leaders have not indicated what the consequences would be for failing to meet the deadline for handing over power to a civilian-led administration. But sanctions are currently imposed on Mali after the overthrow of President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in late August. Well, let's get the latest on these developments from our correspondent, Nabil Rafai, who is in Accra. Nabil, we know, of course, that before this ECOWAS summit, there were indications that Mali had been asked to appoint a civilian authority immediately. What is the latest on this?
Indeed, Lindy, the army leader of Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta, has actually failed to meet the deadline given by ECOWAS to select a civilian leader to oversee the transition for the one-year period. And he was actually here present for this all-important meeting with the ECOWAS leaders. And in his early remarks, the chairman of ECOWAS, that's Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, stated emphatically that the deadline has not been met, which is why this meeting is really critical to see the political future of Mali. So we know that the deadline has not been met, and the leader today actually had a presentation that he gave to the ECOWAS leaders that have gathered here today for this meeting, Lindy.
And so are we likely then to see a renegotiated political transition for Mali, considering, of course, that the junta is being represented at these meetings by Colonel Goïta himself?
Lindy, we are unsure if there will be a renegotiated plan for the transition, because we know ECOWAS is actually emphatic that it wants Mali to be headed by a civilian. That's why they've asked the army leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, to designate a civilian leader to head the transition government, and they are not backing down on that directive that they've given the army leader. So we are certain that there's not going to be a renegotiated deal as to go forward with whatever the army leader is proposing, but then ECOWAS leaders want him to actually designate a civilian leader. All they are calling for is for a civilian person to lead a transition for the one-year period, Lindy.
And so then, Nabil, what options are available to ECOWAS in the event, of course, that the military leadership continues to reject the regional bloc's proposal?
So far, the ECOWAS leaders have not stated exactly what their next line of action would be if he rejects their proposal. But we know that they've already given sanctions on Mali after the coup was held last month. The fact that financial flows to Mali has been cut, and also all the ECOWAS countries have actually shut their borders to Mali. It's likely there will be further sanctions against Mali if their proposal to the army leader, Colonel Assimi Goïta, is not agreed on. But we know, we are just learning, the meeting has ended just a while ago, and what we have been briefed so far is that they've not reached an amicable resolution to the way forward. But then the army leader, Colonel Goïta, has told the ECOWAS leaders that he's going to consult with his other members as to whether they would agree to select a civilian leader to head the transition. But for now, we are expecting him to return to them for what they've agreed on within a week. That's when ECOWAS leaders would take their decision as to the way forward for the political situation in Mali. Lindy.
Thank you so much, Nabil Ahmed Rufai, live for us there in Accra, Ghana. Now, meanwhile, a former long-serving president of Mali has died. Moussa Traoré, who ruled the West African nation for 22 years, died aged 83 at his home in the capital Bamako. The cause of his death is still not clear. Traoré is alleged to have instigated a coup that toppled Modibo Keïta, the country's first post-independence president, back in 1968. Now, Côte d'Ivoire's top court has granted President Alassane Ouattara permission to seek a contentious third term in office. The decision comes as the Electoral Commission bars ex-Prime Minister Guillaume Soro from running in the October 31st presidential vote. CGTN's Joy Kiruki has more.
The decision by the court to clear President Ouattara to run for a third term sparked protests in several cities in Côte d'Ivoire. The protest turned violent as fears grew of a repeat of the conflict that claimed 3,000 lives a decade ago. So far, around 15 people have died in violence since Ouattara, 78, announced in August that he would run for a third term. The constitution limits presidents to 2 terms. Ouattara argues, though, that a 2016 constitutional tweak reset the clock. The president had initially vowed not to run for a third term, but changed his mind after the sudden death of his preferred successor, his prime minister, in July. 86-year-old Henry Conan Betty, who is seeking to return to the presidency after he was ousted in the country's first coup in 1999, has termed Ouattara's tilt as a violation of the constitution. The Constitutional Council has cleared only 4 out of the 44 candidates for the October 31 presidential poll. Some of those barred from the race include former President Laurent Gbagbo and former rebel leader turned Prime Minister Guillaume Soro. The Electoral Commission had announced that anyone convicted of a crime will be disqualified from running for the top office. The court handed Gbagbo a 20-year jail term in absentia. He was charged with looting of the local branch of the Central Bank of West African States during the 2010-2011 crisis.
The candidacy file of Mr. Gbagbo Loro does not comply with the provisions of Article 48, 50 and 51 of the Electoral Code and must therefore be declared inadmissible.
Soro, on the other hand, was barred after he was sentenced in April to 20 years in prison for concealment of embezzlement of public funds.
The candidacy of Mr. Soro Kickback Fori Guam is declared inadmissible.
Several requests filed by Soro's lawyers over the past week to try to allow him stand in the election have received a no from the Electoral Commission. All eyes will now be on the Electoral Commission on whether it will stand firm or budge as the election draws near. Joy Kiruki Juma, CGTN.
This year, the United Nations is marking 75 years since it was established in the aftermath of World War II. Secretary General Antonio Guterres is due to address the annual General Assembly next week. Some 170 world leaders are expected to make video statements during the week-long meeting. One of the main issues on the agenda is a call for warring nations to put down their weapons and support a global truce. The initiative is aimed at uniting the world in the global fight against the coronavirus pandemic. Guterres says a global ceasefire would boost attempts to contain COVID-19 and foster conditions for a coordinated, sustainable and inclusive recovery from the virus. The UN initially called for a global truce earlier in March. Around the world, there now have been nearly 30 million COVID-19 infections and over 900,000 deaths.
My first priority is the implementation of the global ceasefire. And there are some positive signals. We had the peace agreement in Sudan. We have now the political talks in Afghanistan. On the other hand, if one looks at the most difficult confrontations, be it in Syria, be it in Libya, be it in Ukraine, you have standstills, you have ceasefires declared or non-declared that are more or less holding. And in Yemen, there are very intense negotiations to see if we can reach a global ceasefire, a set of confidence-building measures, and the restart of political talks. So there are signals of hope, but we need to mobilize the whole of the international community to make this global ceasefire be a reality until the end of the year.
Well, as this year's 75th session of the UN General Assembly gets underway, here in Africa, attention is focused on priority interventions that will positively impact the continent. CGTN's Deji Badmus takes a look.
Perhaps nowhere on the continent is as challenged in terms of security as West Africa. From Nigeria to Chad, Mali to Burkina Faso, the region is struggling to contain a jihadist insurgency that over the past decade has displaced millions of people and triggered one of the biggest humanitarian crises in the world, which the UN is struggling to address. And this is despite the presence of over 10,000 UN troops in Mali alone. Experts say the UN needs to re-strategize and deepen its intervention efforts to bring lasting peace to the region.
It is really the question of calibrating the intervention to make it inclusive, to make it more effective, and then bringing some innovative ideas and creativity to make sure that wherever they go, they will be able to make an impact, make a difference by bringing about stability and peace.
The UN is currently running at least 7 peacekeeping operations across Africa and several humanitarian missions under the UN Refugee Agency.
I think Mali should be should seize the attention. And then how do they also support other stakeholders in West Africa to make sure that there is peace? There are election issues. The UN has a Department of Political Affairs and Peace and Security. They'll have to look at it. There are elections coming up in about 5 countries, in Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, in Guinea, Burkina Faso, and in Niger. So there has to be, even though UN does not provide election observers, but there are other areas that they can assist.
The UN has a significant presence on the continent, and there's still more that can be done. But funding has been a big challenge in executing projects in Africa. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Well, time now for a short break. Here's what's still ahead on the program. Egypt bracing for the seasonal flooding of the River Nile, which has already killed dozens in Sudan. And an e-health startup in Nigeria rolls out medical insurance that could make malaria treatment more affordable. Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories. Let's have a look. We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice. countries through which the River Nile passes are bracing themselves for the annual Nile flood. There are concerns the floods are likely to be higher than average this year. In Sudan, the intense flooding has already killed over 100 people and damaged tens of thousands of houses. Ethiopia is bracing for a similar, if not worse, situation. As for Egypt, Yasser Hakim has the details.
It's that time of year again in Egypt, but flooding this time around could be more intense. Farmers like Mohammed Abdelaziz prepare themselves for what's to come.
The excess water would damage the land, of course. It damages the crops and the pipelines that carry the water away. Naturally, agricultural production drops a lot at that time.
He had to take certain measures to be able to continue agricultural work amidst the flood chaos.
I install filtering stations in the land and use seawater for irrigation. I then add large amounts of fertilizer, which in turn cleans the water, prevents impurities, and feeds or nourishes the crops.
The government too has prepared itself ahead of the floods.
Egypt monitors the Nile River throughout the year and is on alert before the floods. Authorities gather information about the expected floodwaters coming from Ethiopia, so they adjust the high dam reservoir to receive this amount when floods hit. There are also teams that check the pipelines. They remove any impurities that can block the floodwaters and cause a waterlog that damages the surrounding land.
But for Egypt, the impact of the floods is softened by the Aswan High Dam and Lake Nasser, the reservoir behind the dam.
We call the high dam our water central bank, our life savior. It protects people from floods by containing the excess water in its reservoir. It then keeps the water to be used in years of drought.
So for Egypt, the floods can be seen as a misfortune, especially for farms and agriculture. It can also be seen as a blessing by saving its waters for a tough day. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Sudan's government is calling for more international aid for victims of the country's worst flooding in decades. At least 106 people have died, and the homes of more than 500,000 people have been submerged. CGTN's Patrick Oyet reports.
Sudan's government has declared a state of emergency in the country due to devastating flooding that is sweeping through 17 states. Sudan's Khartoum, Blue Nile and River Nile states are among the hardest hit. The government says the water levels are the highest since 1988 and thousands of people are in need of shelter, household items, water, sanitation and food. More than 111,000 houses have been destroyed. The flooding also damaged 179 public facilities and killed a number of livestock. Khartoum is asking for support from international partners. The United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Egypt have now sent humanitarian aid to Sudan, and Egypt says it is committed to helping Sudan's transitional government to stabilize the country.
We affirm Egypt's support, and the timing, of course, cannot be better. The timing is very opportune given the pressures and the challenges and repercussions of the coronavirus pandemic.
Sudanese authorities dug trenches to try and reduce water levels, but it is not helping much. Sudan's rainy season begins in June until October, and there are warnings that this weather is set to continue. The worry is that without more help, there will simply even be more devastation and deaths. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Meanwhile, South Africa's Water and Sanitation Department has painted a grim picture for Gauteng's water supply as the Vaal Dam levels continue to decline. The dam is now at a record low of less than 40%. During this time of the coronavirus pandemic, this is a critical issue as water is vital in helping to contain the spread of the disease. CGTN's Yulisan Jamela has more.
The Vaal Dam is part of the Vaal River system. It consists of 14 dams and mainly services South Africa's economic hub, the Gauteng province, with some 13 million users. The Val Dam levels are currently continuing their steep fall, plummeting to levels unseen since the beginning of 2017, when large parts of the country were in the grip of a devastating drought. The dam levels have reached a record low of just under 40% this past week. This time last year, the dam was at more than 62% full.
It's a dry season for the inland provinces, and therefore, since the rainy season ended at the end of April, we have expected that there would be a decline. The only difference is that it has been much more steeper than what we had expected. And that is why at the moment, at about 36% of volume, the Val Dam is much lower than what we would have expected at any time.
The Water and Sanitation Department is also concerned by the continued drop in levels of the Mohale and Katse dams in Lesotho. The neighboring Lesotho system augments the water resources in the Vaal River system.
The two dams are part of the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. Katse Dam is the final dam which then directs water into the tunnels that come through to supply water into the integrated Vaal River system. So it is part of the Vaal River system that is very important. It supplies 27% of the water that we require in the integrated Vaal River system. So with dam levels in Lesotho going below the levels at which they are at the moment, it is a concern because it's a very big source of water for us.
Low rainfall, high temperatures, and increased water usage due to COVID-19 are contributing factors to the issue of water scarcity. The department is now urging consumers to limit the usage of water to help curb the problem.
We need to relook at how we see water, what it does, and how we need to treat it. Firstly, water is central to all socio-economic development. Secondly is the fact that we are a water-scarce country. We continue to be. Thirdly, we are impacted negatively by climate change. And fourthly, we need to exercise more effort towards water demand and water conservation.
It is now hoped that this coming summer, the Vaal region will see large amounts of rainfall and lower temperatures. That scenario will help elevate the strain of the Vaal River. Otherwise, the government will have to devise other means to ensure sufficient provision of water in the country. Yudison Jameda for CGTN, the Vaal Dam in South Africa.
Here in Kenya, schools have been closed since March due to COVID-19. Children who've depended on schools for meals have lost that essential access. But an NGO has been working to continue supporting children with nutritious meals. CGTN's Tuli Shabalala has more.
This is the lunch distribution point of Food for Education. The non-profit organization provides nutritious lunches to primary school students from low-income families. Wawira Njiru started the feeding initiative in 2012. But since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, she has been even more determined to scale up the project and reach more hungry stomachs.
It's really critical that children continue getting the right nutrition. Growing and eating doesn't stop because of a pandemic, and you can't social distance on an empty stomach. So we're ensuring that these children and their families are able to stay safe. We've been providing food packages and hot meals from our first initial kitchen. That has reached over 10,000 children and their families.
Vincent Mkuviza is a Class 5 student in Kenya's Kiambu County. He is now one of 10,000 children who benefit from this initiative outside of school.
When schools were open, things were very good. I feel bad because the schools are now closed. If the school reopens, I would work hard in studying. This food has helped me a lot because my mom doesn't have enough money to buy us food. So this food is very helpful to us.
The organization offers the children wristbands called Tap to Eat. The wristbands are linked to a virtual wallet that parents top up using their smartphones. The children pay 92 cents for each meal, while 14 cents is subsidized by the organization.
During this COVID-19 outbreak, this program has really helped me a lot to feed my children because I don't have money to buy them food. The school informed us that they will provide the lunch meal for children this time of corona. I have never heard them complain that the food is bad. They always tell me that the food is good.
Recently, Food for Education launched their second central kitchen, which has the capacity of providing 1,000 meals on a daily basis.
We're looking at building another kitchen that will feed 50,000 kids with a goal of reaching 1 million kids a day by 2025. So our expectation now is that we continue to grow and continue to feed more kids, building more central kitchens like this, using technology to be able to feed the future of Kenya and of Africa.
Hopefully, once schools reopen, they will be able to enroll more children. Tuli Shabalala, CGTN.
In Nigeria, an e-health startup has been expanding a medical insurance service that could see millions paid less for malaria treatment. The World Health Organization says Nigeria alone accounts for a quarter of global malaria deaths, and these deaths are mainly attributed to inadequate access to affordable treatment. Our correspondent Phil Ihaza reports from the nation's capital, Abuja.
Sunday Akinsanya feels feverish and he suspects he has malaria. But he's not too worried because he and his family have signed up since April for a private telemedicine insurance platform known as Wella Health.
I just spoke to a doctor now, so he have directed me to a pharmacy. So I'm going there right now to get tested and get my medication. I've been using their service for over time, so I know definitely I will get well soon.
With a monthly subscription of just $1, subscribers can access online consultations, rapid testing and medication for malaria. This is one of Wella Health's verified pharmacies. A quick test shows Sunday is positive for malaria. He is then given his medication without having to pay out of pocket. More than 80 million Nigerians live in extreme poverty and can't afford to pay for tests or malaria, which usually costs around $6. The coronavirus pandemic has also been impacting the fight against malaria and has overburdened the country's health sector. The Wella Health team says the idea behind this service is to reduce the burden of malaria on national health facilities.
We are taking the burden off general hospitals, teaching hospitals, so we are handling malaria. Malaria is not something that you really need to go to most of these government hospitals, so we are trying to make it easier for them. And we are also taking the burden off or actually helping primary healthcare centers, because this is something primary healthcare centers can do.
Experts say many are unable to afford the cost of data for telemedicine, and the likes of Wella Health will need to create more affordable platforms as well as sensitize people in rural areas on the benefits of health insurance services.
There is a lack of synergy between people being aware of their health insurance and people bringing their intent registering to having a policy with the health insurance. So this is where the challenge is, and it needs to be looked into. Majority are below the poverty level, so they may not see the reason why they should get a policy of health insurance.
The team says with more support from the government, they are hoping to reach more people in rural areas by expanding their current network of 1,000 community pharmacies and making their telemedicine service more flexible for low-income individuals.
Study shows that malaria accounts for a lot of work hours lost in countries like Nigeria, where the burden is high. The hope is that efforts by private health initiatives will go a long way to complement the government's efforts in reducing malaria diseases to the barest minimum so as to ensure a more productive society. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
And time now for CGTN's special coverage of amazing Xinjiang. The team has arrived in the city of Tacheng, a trading hub between China and Western Asia and Europe. It's the 5th stop on a month-long road trip. Well, the city of Tacheng has been greatly influenced by customs and traditions from other cultures, and that includes music. Many people in the city can play the accordion, and it's an important part of their everyday lives. Our reporter Feng Yilei has more on the history and legacy of the instrument.
Through the streets and lands of Tacheng, you can often hear the melody of the accordion floating in the air.
People here have a deep affinity with the instrument, and the reason can be explained by local accordion fanatics like Dauden Dusenhanov, who boasts a collection of some of the most fascinating accordions in the country.
这个整间屋子里有多少手风琴啊？
这屋子里面一共有1200多台手风琴。那最早的那手风琴就是二战前面了。
And each one is distinct from the others in the eyes of an accordion lover.
这是海鸥牌子琴。
它的音色有什么特点？
音色亮。
The accordion is a young instrument in the history of music, but it carries memories of generations, and the collector doesn't want his instruments to stay on the shelves.
演奏，让它就是说话。我的想法是这样子。大部分的这些的手风琴，他们的主人，有些琴的主人，也许可能在呢，也许可能是不在呢。 然后我再给他们维修，他们里面都按的簧片，都按的键，裂开的风箱，我都给他们粘得好好的，在舞台上演奏。
Today, for Tartan residents of all ages, cultures, and backgrounds, the accordion is an important part of daily life.
朋友聚会、同学聚会、家庭聚会、婚礼都离不开的一项这个乐器。如果听到这个手风琴，大家就心潮澎湃，
就是没那么无聊了，感觉很好。
A reminder of our top stories this hour. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo, who is the acting chair of the regional bloc ECOWAS, says Mali's military coup leaders should immediately hand over power to a civilian transitional government. His remarks came ahead of a critical meeting of ECOWAS leaders in Accra today, which was also attended by the head of Mali's military junta, Colonel Assimi Goita. The United Nations is marking 75 years since it was established in the aftermath of World War II. Secretary General Antonio Guterres is due to virtually address the annual General Assembly. Some 170 world leaders are also expected to make video statements during the week-long meeting. And countries through which the River Nile passes are bracing themselves for the annual Nile flood. There are concerns the floods are likely to be higher than average this year. In Sudan, flooding has already killed more than 100 people and damaged tens of thousands of houses. Egypt and Ethiopia are bracing for a similar or worse situation. And let's now turn to a significant development in the history of the peace process in the Middle East. Israel, the UAE and Bahrain are inking a peace deal. We are now bringing you live pictures from the White House, where the Israeli Prime Minister and the foreign ministers of the UAE and Bahrain are attending that signing ceremony. The US brokered the peace agreement, and the process is being overseen by President Donald Trump.
26 years.
Well, that historic peace deal there between Israel, the UAE and Bahrain signed in the presence of US President Donald Trump, who brokered the deal at the White House in Washington, D.C.
Declaration of peace. They will each sign 3 copies, one in English, Hebrew.
And let's go now to Uche for your latest business news.
Thank you, Lindy. And coming up on Africa Live Biz.
U.S. oil and chemical companies push Kenya to drop restrictions on plastics as the two nations negotiate a trade deal. And annual inflation in Sudan rises to 166% in August.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Now, big oil and chemical companies are reportedly trying to get the U.S. government to put pressure on Kenya into dropping its plastic waste restrictions. This is as Washington and Nairobi negotiate a new trade deal. Here's Giles Gibson reporting from the U.S. Capitol.
A group of the biggest oil and chemical companies in the world, including Shell, Exxon and DuPont, reportedly has big plans for Kenya. An affiliate of the environmental organization Greenpeace, called Unearthed, has obtained documents from the American Chemistry Council, or ACC. In a letter to the U.S. Trade Representative's office, the ACC says Kenya could serve as a hub to sell chemical and plastic products to the rest of the continent. Environmental groups fear Kenya could be pressured into walking back restrictions on plastic waste as it tries to seal a trade deal with the U.S. The ACC says any deal won't override Kenya's domestic approach, but there's also mounting concern about the influence of lobbying groups on U.S. environmental policy.
These industry groups have taken over the Environmental Protection Agency, so I'm not surprised to see them engaged in international diplomacy. It's illegitimate, it's unfortunate, and hopefully it'll be put to an end.
The Trump administration has launched initiatives like the Trash-Free Waters program to reduce the amount of plastic and other waste that ends up in rivers and oceans. However, the US hasn't ratified the Basel Convention, a United Nations pact that regulates the global trade in plastic waste. According to the Plastic Pollution Coalition, the US is shipping less plastic waste to countries with poor waste management systems than it was, but it still amounts to tens of thousands of shipping containers every year. The Trump administration says its trade deal with Kenya could serve as a model for agreements with other countries in Africa. So whatever Washington and Nairobi agree on US exports of plastic products and waste could shape the approach of countries all over the continent. Giles Gibson for CGTN in Washington.
But let's head to Sudan now. The country's annual inflation accelerated to 166.83% in August from 143.78% in July. Now, the State Statistics Office attributed this to a rise in food and transportation prices. The country's economy has struggled to recover since South Sudan seceded in 2011 with the bulk of its oil wealth. Now, economic deterioration and a rise in the prices of basic goods led to the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir in April last year. Besides food, the country has witnessed a rise in the price of oil as well as dollars in the black market. Last week, the transitional government declared a state of emergency, and that's after the Sudanese pound continued in a sharp fall in what the authorities are calling a systemic operation to vandalize its economy. Let's head to Tunisia now. A Tunisian insurer called Assurances Maghrébia has now moved closer to a public listing, and that's after the Tunisian Stock Exchange approved its admission in the market. The Tunisian Bourse has not had a new listing for over a year now. Listing of the 47-year-old company is seen as a welcome move to help kickstart activity. Here's CGTN's Adnan Ashaushi reporting.
Leading Tunisian insurance provider Assurance Maghrébia is set to be listed on the main board of Tunisia's stock exchange in the fourth quarter of this year. Shareholders of the insurer had earlier approved the company's decision to expand the company's capital in July. Maghribiya achieved a consolidated turnover of 236 million dinars, around $86.7 million, which represents a rise of 8.4% compared to the same period last year. The company also posted a consolidated profit result of 8.5 million dinars.
After 47 years of activity in the insurance sector, Maghribiya Group has enough experience to open its capital to the public and list its securities in the Tunis Stock Exchange. The goal is to concretize new development opportunities on the long term. Thus, Insure Assurances Maghribiya will reinforce its visibility and transparency.
The group's general manager added that the company seeks, through the public listing, to tap into the additional sources of funds and strengthen its position as one of the leading insurers in the North African country.
Maghribiya will offer 30% of its capital to the public. The overall offer is to trade 1,350,000 shares. The initial public offering before the end of this year will reinforce the strength of the insurance industry and the Maghribiya Group in general.
Experts view the planned public offer and subsequent listing on the stock market as an opportunity for Maghribiya Group to continue its growth, despite the challenges posed by the second wave of the pandemic.
The negative impact of the coronavirus crisis on insurance companies in Tunisia has remained limited. The public listing of Assurance Maghribiya shows that the repercussions of the pandemic in the first 6 months of 2020 did not totally paralyze the economy. Maghribiya's move will certainly have a positive impact on the financial market in Tunisia.
Assurance Maghribiya has distributed 5.3 million dinars, around $1.95 million of dividends to shareholders, which amounts to 45% of the insurer's earnings this year. Assurance Maghribiya is one of the 3 leading players in insurance and reinsurance in Tunisia. After more than a year without a new listing, players in the market are hopeful of closing the year with a new entrant on the stock exchange, despite the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 crisis. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up later on Global Business Africa, Nigeria becomes one of the first African countries to recognize digital currencies. The Securities and Exchange Commission says it will regulate trade in cryptocurrencies. We'll bring you more on that at the top of the hour. For now, it is back to Lindy.
Thanks, Uche. Well, let's take a short break. Here's what's still ahead on Africa Live. Coming up, a group of visually impaired musicians get ready for concerts in Egypt after months of COVID-19 restrictions.
My name is Regina Mirindlovo, and I have felt the pain of abuse and sexual violence throughout my life as a woman living with albinism. The condition is shrouded in dangerous myths in Africa. I have made a decision to take back my power and fight against those myths through my online talk show, My Voice Albinism, The New Era. In the second episode of this 2-part film, I focus on pulling together my latest show. I faced several challenges with the recent announcement of the COVID virus outbreak. I'm not sure if my guests will show up, but I'm determined to break the silence and use my story to inspire the world.
Hello world, my name is Regina Mary and welcome to another awesome African episode of My Voice Albinism, The New Era.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
In Egypt, the visually impaired women musicians who make up the Al Noor Wal Amal Chamber Orchestra are preparing for a return concert. The concert comes after nearly 6 months off due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The group will be performing at the Monastali Palace on the Nile in Cairo. Yasser Hakim has more.
Maryam El-Nagdi, a violin player, joined the Noor Wal Amal Association for the visually impaired 15 years ago. She lives an hour and a half away from the institute. but still manages to practice once a week. Mariam has her own job now, but when she first arrived, she was still a student.
There is a school in the institute. When we first joined, we learned the Braille. We also took normal classes every morning and earned a degree like any educational school in Egypt. Then there's the music. They pick the talented students who have a musical ear to become members of the music group. I was picked and here I am.
The orchestra is preparing itself for the first concert since Egypt's COVID-19 lockdown 6 months ago.
It's a nice feeling. We used to train constantly together and perform a lot. But the virus kept us at home, away from each other. We are happy because we are all friends and enjoy being together and performing in concerts again.
We've only been back for a month, so we are reviewing the music we already performed before. There's no time to learn new music. It takes a long time with Braille notes, and it's not easy. We're excited but also nervous because we haven't trained for a long time.
The Nur wal Amal Orchestra was established in 1971 with 15 performers. Now they're 40. They have received worldwide acclaim and performed in more than 24 countries.
The young girls who are still in school level, they study here and we provide them with free food, accommodation and education. The graduated girls are independent in their homes, have other jobs as the music comes more of a hobby for them. We give them monthly salaries in addition to a bonus for every concert and pocket money every time they travel abroad.
It's a one-of-a-kind group, and their achievements are a reflection of the determination and ambitions of its members.
I always push myself to be on a higher level than others. Don't want to be a normal person, want to achieve things. I produced videos for social media on how you should treat visually impaired people. It was a great success.
Indeed, even Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi commemorated Mariam as being a role model for the younger generation. And with the resumption of concerts next week, the journey continues for these talented young women. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The world has been propelled into a virtual future and present as it emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic. And one of the industries significantly affected has been the publishing field, with new book launches put on hold during global lockdowns. To help kickstart the industry in South Africa, the National Book Fair held a 3-day digital festival for literary lovers. CGTN's Julie Shire reports.
I personally love the idea of a book fair and buying on the spot the books I want. But in this new normal, many things have changed, and this year's National Book Fair has had to go ahead virtually. Organizers held a virtual event that has something for everyone.
The format is different, but the story's there, the soul, the pleasure, the laughter, the sadness of that story remains. And so we did exactly the same with this book fair. That although we were going to go virtual and we don't have the tactile and the textured and the physicalness of the book fair, we wanted to bring exactly that same feeling.
The COVID-19 lockdown is a challenging time for authors and book publishers, but this reinvented online book fair is helping writers get back on their feet.
The great thing about it is that everybody has access to the festival itself, because then they can just be on their phone or be in front of the computer. Everybody in every province, because it happens in Joburg, so you have to drive there, and some people can't really make it. So I think this is our new normal.
Everybody's been learning new things. The authors have learned how to present themselves digitally, how to promote themselves. So it's just been a fantastic experience.
The festival runs every year and often tackles pertinent topics brought to the fore by authors and literary lovers.
7 of our sessions deal with the issues of race and identity. Very important in this time, not just in South Africa. South Africa always has these things that it battles with. But in the world, the the Black Lives Matter movement. We also have Breaking Through Shame, who speak to what shame you need to deal with in your communities and in your families.
South Africans aren't big on reading, but with more platforms like this for local writers, it's starting to catch on.
The reading culture has changed so much in the past 5 years, and that's because there's a lot of books that have come from South African writers, young writers, books about, just stories that everybody can relate to. The literature space in South Africa is wide open. People just need to write and come in.
South Africa's Book Week, which preceded the fair, was aptly themed Passport to Tomorrow, a peek into the future for most businesses that now have to adapt to the changing times. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And coming up in your sports news.